In this video, we'll talk about the facial features on cult leaders Jeff and Shaleia Ayan that point to why they were so drawn to one another, how they were misusing their life force, and signs of depletion. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. So something a little different today for the face reading. I'm reading Jeff and Shaleia Ayan. There is a Netflix documentary with them in it called Escaping Twin Flames. And these are two cult leaders who are making the claim that you have one soulmate. You're essentially, I think the way they described it is two souls, or one soul in two bodies, and this is your one solitary person. And anyway, the whole documentary, it's 3 parts, is about how they start pushing people into finding their ultimate romantic partner, and it of course just blows up and people are hurt and manipulated. It's very interesting. So shout out to my friend Caradwin. Thank you for making this suggestion that I should read them because it is pretty interesting. So I'm going to talk about the key features. I can't read both of them fully. We'd be here for a long time, but first and foremost, the thing I noticed right out of the gates is that I could see depletion markers on both of their faces throughout the course of the documentary. And we want to think in the context of face reading, when we are misusing or not allocating our life force well, we will see depletion in the organ systems. There's sort of a source code to life to a certain degree, and it's if you live in integrity and you are honest and you are compassionate and you are kind and you spend most of your time there, your collective bodily systems, your energetic system are going to be stronger and more resilient. And when we misuse those things, we get weaker. This is why pessimistic people get sick more often and also don't live as long. So what I saw through these people, through this documentary, were a couple things. So one, with Jeff, at the beginning of the documentary, his face looks so-so, it looks pretty good overall in terms of like health markers. But as it goes on and the more manipulative he becomes, the darker he gets around the eyes. When we see darkness around the eyes, that is the kidney system or the water element. And when we see a depletion there, that is where our Jing is stored. So the Jing, our constitutional strength, is stored in the kidney system. It's the water element. And so if we see a misuse of our life force, the kidneys are commonly taxed. You can do it through overwork, too much sex, too many stimulants. There's lots of ways to deplete the kidneys, but also being out of moral alignment will also do it. So he leaks there. His kidneys get weaker throughout the entirety of this documentary. It's really interesting to watch. Shaleia takes on excess earth. And what that's code for is she plumps up. She just gets heavier and heavier and heavier throughout the documentary. And we want to think anytime a person puts on extra body weight and it shows up in the face, this is a surplus or an imbalance of the earth element. And so when we see that, the themes that go with the earth element, compassion, empathy, nurturing, house and home, food. And so the thinking in the East is if you are over nurturing, over taking care of people, over manipulating, sort of like a hovering mother that is devouring her child and the child's experiences by overprotecting, which is what cult leaders kind of do, then those earth elements can fall out of place. Yes, maybe it leads you to eating differently and heavier because you're misusing those emotions. Everything in the East is a two-way street. It's not like the chicken or the egg. It's like the chicken and the egg coexist at the same time and they're constantly making each other. So that's the way to think about it. She took on extra earth as a result of this process. That's my professional opinion in watching them both decline a bit. The other thing that I found very interesting is that they both have very similar features. So people that get into relationship often have enough similar features that they end up dating or being long-term partners. And the way to think about this is that we mimic things in the natural world that we want to be like. So in the context of body language, if you've ever noticed or read about it, if you're talking to someone and you have your hand on your hip and you notice the other person does that same thing or adopts a stance like you, that's usually a subconscious marker that they like you, they're interested, or they want your attention. Now, sometimes people do it the opposite way intentionally to develop rapport on the other side, right? To make the other person feel like we're getting some kind of rapport. So regardless, we mimic things that we want to be like. This is also why twins, people who are identical twins, end up staying together a long time. They live together. They sometimes, get partners and date at the same time and try to do a lot. When we see something that looks like us or that behaves like us, we usually want to be around it. So they have enough similar features and there's enough of their face that has a similar countenance. So when they both smile, they both kind of get squinty around the eyes. They both have sort of a top-heavy face, which means larger at the top and narrower at the bottom. This was easier to see in Shaleia when she was thinner, but both a bit top-heavy this way, narrow at the bottom. They both have action-oriented eyebrows, and their spacing in terms of the nose and the mouth very similar proportions. They look alike. And so it makes a certain amount of sense that they wanted to be together. The problem with when they look too much like each other is they can overconsume one another. And there's almost a narcissistic tendency that can happen when people are too similar, either in personality or through looks. There can be an overconsumption where they become one congealed unit of just take, and eat, and consume, which is not always great. And it looks like in the context of these people, that's the way it went. Jeff also has a triangular shaped face. And so that means wider at the top, narrower at the bottom, but he's also got a weak jaw. So what this means is when we look at the wood element, the root system is the jaw, the eyebrows are the leaves. His face, the way it reads is he's got a fire-shaped face with leaves at the top but no root system down below, which means the fire that he produces, the glitz, the glamour, the flare, all of that stuff is going to be short-lived because there's no real infrastructure down below to burn. So I find it interesting in terms of how his rise to stardom with this cult and this thing, and how quickly it fizzled out and burned once people could smell the bullshit. So we see this in face reading. When we see a triangular shaped face, the pitfall, the potential thing is that things can flare and be consumed easily and extinguish fast. So that means pursuits in life can go a bit faster than they should, come into a lot of power and then lose it all. Someone like James Dean had a face like this. And in the context of face reading, they'll say life force can actually be extinguished early too. And you've got to mitigate those things to make sure that doesn't happen. But he has this face. So that was pretty interesting to me. On Shaleia's face, one of the big leaks is she lacks the fertility markers. So we haven't talked about this in face reading yet, but the philtrum right here, this area right here, the length of the philtrum, the width, and the depth are the three best markers you're looking for in terms of good, quote unquote, fertility in face reading. She does not have a very strong philtrum, and in the documentary, she mentions that they have to have in vitro fertilization, and then they end up having to terminate the pregnancy because I think it was ectopic or it wasn't viable. Something happened. But I look for these markers, these congruent markers. Face reading theory says this. Do we see a marker in real time that we can prove? Yes. And so she happens to fall into that. Another person to check out is Tyra Banks. If you look at her face, she had a terrible time with her fertility journey, no philtrum whatsoever. Does it mean it's always like this? No, but often it does. So start looking at women who have had fertility problems, or men that are struggling with fertility, or a couple that's struggling with fertility, and check this area out. Is it long, wide, and deep? And if it's not, it's kind of a pointer or a marker to that. So outside of that, there's a piece here. I wasn't able to do their inner and outer personas because I couldn't get fully frontal shots, and that's just what it is. So I couldn't find that. But there is an idea here that I think is very relevant. Face reading ultimately is about looking at people's faces, getting a read for them, intuiting, sensing, doing all of that, because we want to navigate people well too. And this brings us to, especially in this context, for people like this who are cult leaders, we're all going to encounter cult-like minded people who have a cult mindset. Maybe they're not leading a cult, but people that are very controlling. They want to manipulate. They want to overbear their position into the world. We want to read people's faces to hopefully mitigate some of that, navigate around it. But one of the best things that you can do to defend yourself against those external forces is what they call exercising the tiger. So in Chinese medicine, one of the things they talk about is that all of the organ systems, the paired organs, have these animals that live inside of them. And it's a metaphor. It's an artistic metaphor because the behavior of these animals are indicative of how you nourish and protect the organ. And by protecting the organ, you protect the function that organ fulfills in your body. So it's a very elegant way to paint a picture that is timeless and stands the test of time. People can still look back on it. The white tiger lives in the lungs. Tigers are very territorial. They're very good at what they call saber rattling, which means a tiger can be very imposing by nature. Their whole presence is very intimidating, but they're very sexually aggressive. They have a lot of tendencies, if you read about tiger behavior, and the East used this image because part of how we protect our lungs and how we protect that system is by challenging the lungs, being very robust with our physical exercise, things like martial arts, things like very vigorous hiking, things where we are being out of breath. This strengthens the lungs, and the lungs strengthen something called Wei Qi. Wei Qi is this idea in the East. It's this energetic layer that resides between the muscle layer and the skin layer. It's this energetic membrane that protects you from the external world, and it's the membrane that allows you to interface well. What do you let in and what do you not let in? So if you think about that, the integrity of the Wei Qi, when the Wei Qi is strong, we don't get sick as often. It also means that we do not take on negative influences from people, bad jobs, bad environments, bad friendships. Wei Qi is not just restricted to bacterial infections coming into the body, but it's also how do we defend the external world? And so the East has these very good pictures. You got to have strong lungs. You better be challenging your body in very difficult ways, because when you do that, when you challenge the body in a very difficult way, we are fundamentally tougher and more resilient, and we have more strength. And when you cultivate strength, and you've worked hard to cultivate strength, you are way less apt to get rid of it. The same way, if you forged a sword and pounded that metal, and made a beautiful sword, you're not going to just get rid of it. You're going to see the value in it because it protects you. It's the same thing here. And I made this image of the white tiger behind the rib cage because you got to think about this. This is the image you want to think about in terms of protecting yourself against external pathogenic forces like cult leaders. And it also relates to a bunch of other things. But I think it's a cool image. My friend Caradwin brought that conversation into the mix because she had questions around it, so I thought I would put it in here. But in any case, this is my read on them. Pretty interesting documentary. You guys should check it out. And thanks a bunch.